Footprints in Eden, written and read by Elton Gar. After almost 6 years of working as scouts, this was the most interesting world they had found. Before now, Stella and Ernie had earned most of their money by flagging asteroids with high mineral or water content. That would never make them enough to settle on one of the civilized worlds, but it let them fuel their ship and buy the parts that Stella needed to keep the ship running. "We can land. I'm more worried about taking off again," Stella said. "Well, if we're stuck on a planet, at least we'll be stuck together," Ernie answered. "And it doesn't hurt that it's a paradise." "Any world with you would be a paradise, honey," Ernie said. Stella grinned. After 8 years of marriage, she knew when he was trying to convince her to do something that he wanted. But it wasn't as annoying since she had already agreed. "All I'm saying is we pick some place we don't mind being for a while," Stella said. Then she kissed him. She didn't want to discourage him. The safest option was usually to pick a small island. You were unlikely to find any large predators, and you could explore the entire area quickly. But they picked out a large, calm valley in a temperate area. The ship landed next to a quiet, calm lake, shuddering as it dropped the last several inches. Throughout the 30-foot-long shuttle, things fell off the walls. Pots and pans banged. The picture of Stella's mother fell off the wall. Barely aware of anything, Ernie stepped over the last picture of Stella's mother and began to gather their barely used survival gear. But she couldn't get overly upset. Of the two of them, he was the one following procedure. Once you determined that the immediate location was safe, then you could take your time. It still annoyed her as he pulled on the full backpack, strapped on the oxygen mask, and stepped into the tiny airlock. He didn't even help her pick up the things on the floor. But as the door slid behind him, that irritation disappeared almost immediately. It was replaced by the low-level anxiety she felt every time he stepped out of the ship. But this was different. In the past, it was the fear that there might be some technical malfunction. Using a spacesuit to verify the mineral content of an asteroid wasn't as safe as being on the ship, but she was the one who maintained the suits, and that control helped. This time he was stepping into a living and unexplored world where anything could happen. But if it was anywhere near as good as it appeared, then that discovery might let them earn enough to buy a home on a civilized planet and even afford a child or two. There was nothing more exciting than being the first person to step onto a new world. Ernie knew there were risks, but he could do this every day for the rest of his life and be happy. And it wasn't just the rush, though the excitement and even the risk were part of the fun. It was more knowing that he was contributing to humanity's future. As he looked around at the strange, twisting alien plants that stretched towards the sun, like plants on so many other worlds, he imagined a distant future, one where humans, or whatever descended from humans, lived and grew old in this valley. He imagined children playing, chasing the small, quick lizards that he saw scurrying away from him. Even the lake was likely to still be here. Perhaps they'd build a dock and fish from it, or swim in the water on a hot day. They wouldn't know who he was, but they'd know someone had found this world, that the human experiment would continue. Then, as he looked more carefully, he saw something he hadn't expected. There was a path. That wasn't unusual, but some branches along the path had been cut. Not broken off or torn away, but smooth cuts, like someone with a knife had made the path. Looking more carefully, Ernie saw footprints on the ground. They were too large and curved to be human, but they weren't animal footprints, because whoever had made them was wearing something on their feet. Not shoes exactly. It was more like there were lines across the bottom, as if they had been partially wrapped. Carefully he followed the trail. It didn't look fresh enough for him to expect anyone nearby, but after about a quarter of a mile he found what he could only describe as a campsite. There was a small hole with ashes on the bottom, and a few rocks around it. Not a circle like you might expect from a human camp, but probably doing something similar, to keep the fire contained and help keep the person next to it warm. There was also a small pile of yellow fruit that had been almost entirely eaten. He decided that was enough for today and returned to the ship. As he went, he saw the animals were more skittish than he might expect if they hadn't been hunted. There were also cuts in many of the trees. At first, he'd assumed those cuts were more branches that had been cut back, and some of them were, but others formed a pattern. He didn't think it was a language. There wasn't enough for that. But someone had marked the trail. Perhaps he was just telling people it was a trail, but he suspected there was more to the message. An assurance of safety, he hoped, though he knew it could just as easily be a warning of danger. He wasn't surprised to see Stella cooking when he got back. The ship's stores weren't exciting, but she had enough spices to make the food taste good, though not enough to make it exciting to eat. He tossed her 2 of the plump yellow fruits he had picked. She looked at them, then cut off a small piece and put it into the ship's processor. It whirred, and then, after a few seconds, a small green light came on. Well, It's not toxic. She took a nibble. And it's not terrible. That's what the locals think, too. Ernie dropped into his chair. So the animals eat them? Not exactly. All the signs point to tool users. Probably a primitive civilization. Stella sat next to him. She clearly knew what he was thinking. They had discussed it before. She took his hand and said, I don't like it either, but they'll still pay us. And they'll colonize, perhaps faster than they would if this wasn't an inhabited world. And they might even pretend they aren't using the natives as slave labor for a while, Ernie said. We won't be the ones doing it, and someone else will find this place either way. Eventually, perhaps. But we don't go places that have been marked empty on the star maps, and I doubt many other people do either. If we record this as a barren world, it could be a century before anyone double-checks. Perhaps that would be long enough. Stella took another bite of the fruit and said, It's really not bad. You're thinking about something, Ernie said. You remember that world we found around Beck's prime? You mean the world barely out of its primordial stage? Ernie said. If by barely you mean a few million years out, we could say it had a few useful plants. No one's going to be going there. That won't earn as much as finding a habitable world, but perhaps if we scout around a bit more, we can gather a few boxes of fruit and a few more plants. As long as we can grow them, no one is going to care where they came from, and it should earn us enough to settle down somewhere. The words hit Ernie. He knew Stella wanted to have a family. She had always wanted that. She'd only become the ship's mechanic because she loved him and was convinced working together was the best way to earn enough credits to settle down. There is a new colony being found on the Shorndal system. It's not as lush as this world, and it will be hard work, but they encourage people to have as many children as possible. And the colony world will always accept more scouts. It's not the paradise you always talked about, Stella said, giving Ernie an out. Ernie knew if he pushed, she would do what he wanted. She had been doing that for years, but instead he said, Any world with you would be a paradise. Author's note. I love the idea of exploring space, and the most exciting thing out there, perhaps the only truly exciting thing, is life. From what we can see, once you're not trapped on a planet, most resources are pretty easy to come by. There are entire asteroids made of gold and other more useful metals. Even water doesn't seem all that uncommon. But I'm not sure I trust humans to have learned from the past mistakes. Even if the worlds they colonized held only animals, that may not be great, but I don't have the same feeling about the dodo going extinct as I do about the genocide of so many native populations. So I thought, how might someone who discovered one of those populations protect it? And in a world as big as this one, the simple answer is to leave it alone. And sure, there may be a cost to that. For Stella and Ernie, it's a payout. For the human race, it's one less habitable world. But there is another group. I intentionally didn't have them in the story, because I wanted to make it easier for both characters and the reader to think of them as unimportant, because I think being able to understand the point of view of people is useful, even if those are bad people, because when you don't understand, it's easy to assume that things have changed, that we've moved on because we're not making the same mistakes. But we can still dehumanize people, treat them as a means to an end, or even an obstacle to overcome, instead of humans. And one of the most important ways to avoid that is to know it's possible. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, consider visiting my Patreon at patreon.com/Elton. Free members get access to prose versions of many of my short stories and can vote on my monthly theme polls. And members at any paid level get access to over 50 Patreon-exclusive short stories and can vote every week on what I write next. Thank you, Elton Gar.